I think this is an unprecedented opportunity to encourage young dancers of color to enter the competition world. I think one of the main challenges that we're facing in terms of creating diversity in ballet has everything to do with numbers, really. So in order to create a pathway for young dancers to get into professional companies, they have to be in the schools. And so I think the first question we have to start asking ourselves is what is it that has children of color not, or families of color not bringing their children to the dance studio to study. I know a lot of people think that it's economic. We like to say that, you know, the reason why we don't have diversity in ballet is because, you know, people of color can't afford it. That's kind of not really true. I mean, there are Black people that can't afford it. There are white people who can't afford it. There are, you know, brown people who can't afford it. There are white people who can't afford it. So what is it that's different? And I'm thinking there's something about brown people, I'll say Black specifically, not seeing ballet as a place for them, as a space that they can occupy. And that's a common occurrence for Black Americans historically, in terms of like what we have had to deal with in this country. There are historically places that we were not allowed to go in. And I'm not even talking about in terms of Jim Crow. We can move forward past Jim Crow and you just think, oh, these spaces have been excluded, and slowly begin to open. But you need to be able to see yourself in those spaces in order to say, oh, that's a space for me. I think that some of the most important aspects that we're not really addressing fully is, when we're talking about diversity, is the idea that there is a very cultural divide. And it's not even a racial thing. I think that ballet in and of itself is a culture. It's a mentality. It's a lifestyle. And I don't think that a lot of the programs that are trying to diversify are really taking that into consideration. What does it take to penetrate those walls? I mean, I always say that ballet feels like it has a commitment to whiteness. And that commitment has everything to do with what we consider to be beautiful, what we consider to be elegant and refined. And that goes into, who do we think is beautiful, elegant, refined, and what does that look like in our culture? And so you can drop someone that looks different from that ideal into that scenario, but it doesn't change the ideal of beauty and perfection. So it's the concept of ballet that needs to be elastic. It's the concept of beauty that needs to be expanded. And I think that representation breeds inspiration. And so it's easy for certain children to look at a ballet poster and see themselves and go like, oh yeah, I want to be that. Fairy princesses, things like that. It seems trivial, but when you're really talking about creating possibility in a child's mind, that's what's required. And creating that cultural bridge that makes it accessible in the mind for young students. That's the young student, but that's also for the parent, because what parent wants to put their child in a situation where they themselves might not be comfortable entering a building or entering a space? Imagine sending your child into a studio alone. But also, like, for instance, dancing at Dance Theatre of Harlem, this is what is interesting to me about this whole concept of creating diversity and this mythology about the fact that one of the reasons why Black people don't do ballet is because it's an economic thing. What's interesting to me is as a dancer at Dance Theatre of Harlem, the majority of the dancers that made up that company were from anywhere from working class to well-to-do families, period. There were some people who were what we could call poor or financially challenged, but the majority of the people that came through that company had support systems, had enough money. And when I say working class, which means, you might need a scholarship, but you have the other, human resources in order to support you in that 10 to 15 year training period. So there are African American families and families of color that are those families. And somehow we're not looking at them. So this is the difference between exposure and access. Exposure is only looking at a certain demographic, and supplying real access kind of takes into consideration who really would be interested and capable of doing it. So you have to have a support system. Everybody who has become a ballet dancer or a tennis player or an ice skater knows that there are hundreds of thousands of hours that not the actual person participating in, but the family has to it's a collective effort to get someone onto a stage. And when we neglect that reality, we do a disservice to the whole concept of creating, a pathway, an authentic pathway to professional, ballet dancers. What's really interesting is, I know that Black people talk about being Black a lot, because it is with us every day. I mean, I doubt that the average white person wakes up in the morning like, oh, I'm white today. No, but for Black people, you actually literally wear it. As you traverse through the world sees you. You feel your Blackness. That's this way we talk about microaggressions. You feel it in micro ways, that you recognize that you walk into a room and you might be the only Black person, or that people notice that you feel people noticing your Blackness. As a ballet dancer or Black people who are in those rarefied spaces that we don't occupy in great numbers, you end up being the only one in a lot of situations. In a ballet class, on a stage, there's a plethora of different ways that you are the only, and so by virtue of your singleness, you're singled out. You're not asking for it, it just is. White women can understand this in corporate America when they're like, oh, I'm the only woman in the office, and the stressors that come with that. I feel like when Eric Underwood says something like, I never wanted to be a Black dancer, I just wanted to be a great dancer, it is what every dancer strives to be. I think one of the things that would really help dancers of color in ballet would be a stronger mentoring sort of foundation. Primarily because it is so solitary. Like I said, oftentimes you're like one of a few. If you're lucky in a ballet school, especially if it's a conservatory environment, you're definitely going to be one of a few. And it can be very lonely. It can be culturally isolating. And I think that if young dancers had the benefit of someone, if not in the company of the school they're training in, but just in general, someone, a professional who has walked in their shoes and has been through those struggles and that feeling, to just reach out and say, okay, this is what you need to do. I know you're not crazy. It's a real thing. But even things like how to do your makeup, how to do your hair, especially, African American young men can have all sorts of hair, what is the proper hair? What kind of haircut do I need to get if I'm going to perform? There's a difference between studying, your hair can be any type of way, but how do you keep your individuality and transfer that onto stage so that it's appropriate on stage, but you can still kind of rock whatever look off stage? It's really important. So I started Memoirs of Blacks in Ballet, MobBallet, for this reason and some other ones. One, I wanted to curate the story and the stories and history of Blacks in ballets, past and present. The other thing I wanted to do is I have something called the roll call, and now I think it's 314 names of Black professional ballet dancers, past and present. And my goal is to have that roll call be almost like a Black Wikipedia, where you can click on a name and get some information on all the dancers there, on any dancer there. And I'd love to turn that into a mentoring opportunity where anybody who's on the roll call maybe could register to become a mentor. So if you are in the Oregon Ballet or in the school and you're hoping to get into Oregon Ballet, you can go on there and say, well, what Black dancers were here? You can look and say, oh my God, there were a few. And maybe you can contact them and ask them about what their experiences are. I think it's invaluable, especially when you don't see yourself with regularity and you don't see yourself up close. Part of so much of dance is mentorship, student to teacher, and then also sort of like when you're that student looking into company rehearsal and you have your favorite dancer and they say hello to you, and if you can create a relationship that supports your journey, it's invaluable. We're hoping that the Indianapolis City Ballet competition will act as a stepping stone. That if they do well there, then this will be the first step to getting to the Prix de Lausanne in Switzerland. There is no greater stage where access is abundant, where you have the greatest companies and schools in the world with eyes on these young dancers. And it matters little often if they actually win or place, because it's the idea of someone being aware of your existence and being able to track you. When we talk about mentorship, this is another, you find people. And young dancers can find other organizations that might interest them. Oftentimes, especially with this new generation coming up, they don't do a lot of research. Usually it's like the name that their friends are saying the most or the name that they're reading on the internet the most, but they don't do research in terms of saying, well, what would be a good fit for me? Whether it's like my style, my body type, or whatever. Well, here they get to see an abundance of different representations of the same thing. And maybe find themselves or find that they're attracted or drawn to a different company or a different school, or maybe a director would find them. That doesn't happen very often, especially in one place at such a high level. I just think that if there is a space where people of color aren't, especially if we're talking about in ballet, then we need to start looking at ways of creating pathways into them. I think this is an unprecedented opportunity to encourage young dancers of color to enter the competition world. So this is a way of creating an opportunity that hopefully will really become a vehicle for more of these dancers to get into a space where they can be seen on a very high level.
Then the gold medal winner is number 210, Daniel Durrett.